Information. It's everywhere. Billboards, TVs, radios, social media. It's in every single one of our pockets, on our phones, competing for our attention. Yet with so much information out there, from so many different sources, how can we know what to trust? And how can we avoid the online ambush? Welcome to Cove Thoughts. Hi, I'm Greg Colton, and in today's episode of Cove Thoughts, we're going to be talking about how potential adversaries are using the internet to lure you into an online ambush, targeting you through the very information that you provide them. We're going to explore how this is part of a new contest conducted underneath the detection threshold, but always present. A contest not just of information, but to shape your very understanding of knowledge. A contest called cognitive warfare. We're also going to give you some very practical tips to help you avoid these dangers, anti-online ambush drills if you like. But first, a story. In 2018, the world received a massive wake-up call. Cambridge Analytica, a British tech company, had been harvesting data from individuals' Facebook accounts without their knowledge. The data included details on users' identities, friend networks and likes. The idea was to map personality traits based on what people had liked on Facebook and then use that information to target audiences with digital ads. That data was detailed enough to create psychographical profiles of the subjects and their locations. This was then sold to political campaigns. It allowed them to identify potential swing voters and develop targeted messaging more likely to resonate. In effect, it used information that individuals voluntarily put onto the internet to create messages most likely to result in them changing their beliefs, perceptions or behaviours, including who to vote for. The Cambridge Analytica case showed that in the contest for influence, we are all targets. We can also all be our own worst enemies. So why is this important for the army? Well, information warfare, the battle of narratives, has always been a part of war. Throwing visiting envoys down wells, or placing the severed heads of your enemies on spikes outside your castle walls send pretty strong, if rather unsubtle, messages. Messages which are designed to influence the behaviour of would-be enemies. However, the advent of the digital age saw a significant change in the conduct of information warfare. With digital devices in everyone's pockets, would-be influencers no longer needed to concentrate on targeting decision-makers or political leaders. They could now directly connect with ordinary people on an individual level, without having to go through an intermediary such as a newspaper editor or TV station. Of course, this means they can target members of the military the same way. It is this element of precision which makes the digital age so different, as Dr Emily Bienvenue, a senior analyst at the Defence Science and Technology Group, explains.
One of my first observations as an analyst and researcher in this area would be that a lot of the research and analysis to date really focuses on foreign competitors' misinformation campaigns and approaches a lot of the ideas of misinformation in the old framework of perhaps propaganda. But these digital vectors offer something more than means to transmit information. They offer a way of better understanding and then socially engineering people's behaviour with precision.
This has the potential to change not just how we perceive the world around us, but the very foundations of knowledge on which our assumptions and understanding are based. The effects on democratic nations of societal fractures based on the online manipulation of populations could be profound. This intellectual contest is sometimes referred to as cognitive warfare. Dr. Zac Rogers is from the Jeff Bleich Center for the US Alliance in Digital Technology, Security and Governance at Flinders University in Adelaide. I asked him just how cognitive warfare works.
We're really talking about the architecture of cognition and the architecture of knowledge which is occurring through cyberspace. So when I talk about cognitive warfare, and as an extension or perhaps moving on from the concept of information warfare, in cognitive warfare, we're really talking about epistemology and how we put together knowledge and how information as a concept plays a role in that architecture of knowledge and how we think about concepts and institutions, particularly with regard to things like authority, legitimacy and governance and democracy. And all of these concepts have their roots in the way we put knowledge together. And so cognitive warfare, Greg, or for me, or even epistemological warfare, is that the digital age is causing really interesting and difficult to understand shifts in the way we put knowledge together. So a cognitive war, or as an extension of, or surpassing of information war, is that we're in a bit of a bind in terms of the way we understand some of the concepts that are important to society, like democracy and rule of law and legitimacy and authority. All of these things are more shaky and a bit more protean now, because the way we put knowledge together as individuals, as communities, and as a society, and even as a nation, is really shifting with this massive shift that's occurred very rapidly over the last 20 years to ubiquitous digital use.
So cognitive warfare is not only very real, but it is a very serious threat. The danger comes when digital algorithms perpetuate the amplification of cognitive bias by showing people the same messages repeatedly over long periods of time. Clint Watts is a distinguished research fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute in the United States, and he's also author of the book Messing with the Enemy: Surviving in a Social Media World of Hackers, Terrorists, Russians, and Fake News. He's termed this phenomenon preference bubbles.
Preference bubbles are the natural extension of what we used to call like search engine bubbles, or essentially that you get into your own information bubble based on how an algorithm feeds you. But I only believe that is half true at this point. A preference bubble is a combination of when an algorithm combines with your choices to keep providing you things, what you want from people that look like you and talk like you. And that's how social media is designed. So there's a guy named Eli Pariser who kind of talked about the filter bubble of Google, 10 years ago. And that if you search in Google over and over again, Google will return results, or any of them really, any of these search engines return results based on what you search for. But preference bubbles are different because now they're based on all of your preferences, your likes, your shares, who shares stuff with you. And that goes across Facebook, Twitter, any of the social media platforms. They are designed to keep giving you more content that you like. And once you get into that bubble, there's like serious digital tribalism that sits in. And I think that's the three things I talk about in the book are: one, you get clickbait populism, where people try to win the crowd by saying things they think the crowd will like. And this actually changes and distorts the way people start communicating, because they want more likes and shares and retweets. And so they start gaming what the system will give of more likes, shares, and retweets, and then not saying other things. And it provides power to those that can accrue the most likes and shares. I think the second part is the social media nationalism, that digital tribalism. People are beginning to choose their own identity, not based on what they physically are, but what they are in the virtual world. Hashtags, avatars, bios, causes that they believe in, whether they actually do anything about those causes or not. And then I think the third part is really the death of expertise, which is the belief that any one person is as smart as any one person on any topic in the world because they have access to so much information on the internet. And that's really come to play as a super dangerous phenomenon here with this COVID-19, outbreak and pandemic around the world. And so those three things sort of combine together, and all of them work against democracy in parallel and sort of amplify the divisions that are going on across democracies right now.
Undermining an individual's perception of knowledge, or what they believe is actually true, undermines the very fabric of trust that connects them to their families, their peers, the society they belong to, and the nation which governs them. Indeed, in many ways, trust is the strategic resource which binds together democratic societies. Emily Bienvenue again.
So I guess there's two things there. This is partly about changing what people think through better understanding what makes them tick, what their preferences are, and there's, yes, being able to nudge that behaviour through the use of bots and algorithms. And not only that, but quite simply just some of the mechanisms that are embedded in the digital platforms. So what we might call referral mechanisms. The other point to be made here in terms of what is the risk to democracy, it's not just about these ideas and how they are transmitted through these platforms, but there's a deeper, more insidious problem presented here, because these technologies are designed to exploit and manipulate for profit and politics. They run contrary to the very notion of democracy. They break down that social contract, not only trust in the democracy, how other states perceive democratic states or how other people might perceive democratic states, but the trust that exists amongst people in democracies and the basic conventions on which they rest. So things like open, transparent systems.
So, digital platforms provide the perfect medium for conducting cognitive warfare. But what does this mean for members of the Australian Defence Force? Major General Marcus Thompson is the head of the Information Warfare Division, and I asked him about the threat to our people.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Look, I mean, in terms of describing the threat that our forces and our soldiers face in this domain, it's pretty complex. You know, it's a lot of it comes through social media. You know, we've professional militaries have practiced psychological operations, deception operations. You know, there's nothing new about any of that. Of course, what we're seeing these days is those activities being conducted in this relatively new media of cyberspace, and that provides the threat with an opportunity of speed and scale, and that's the nature of the new operating environment. And I would say up front that it's as relevant in a home location as it is in a deployed location, whereas some of these techniques, you know, were really only relevant in a deployed location, you know, some years ago, but nowadays, you know, predominantly because of the growth of technology, our use of the internet and social media means that these threats are manifesting in home location.
It's clear then that there's a threat, and it's constant. It's not linked to a deployment or to one malign actor. Instead, it's always present and from numerous sources. A myriad of online ambushes waiting for you to blunder into their cognitive engagement areas. So how do we counter this threat? Well, there are two key aspects. Let's term the first one proactive protection. The need to limit the information out there that an adversary can use for precision micro-targeting against us. This will reduce the ability for that adversary to set the online ambush in the first place. And I asked General Thompson how we can all address this through developing organisational and individual resilience.
Well, I think institutional and organisational resilience is very, very important in the contemporary operating environment. But I would say that it ultimately starts with individual resilience in this environment, and people thinking through, individuals thinking through, what am I actually putting out there in cyberspace? What am I posting online? Is that really necessary? What am I freely giving away that a professional analyst with a targeting mindset might be able to turn around and use against me? And when I say professional analyst with a targeting mindset, now, that could be a foreign intelligence service. It could be a criminal element. Anyone or anything that might wish ill against us. And there are some technical pieces to this too, Greg. And I would say that some good digital hygiene will help build that basis for individual and collective resilience. I mean, I mentioned earlier. I mean, what are you posting on and sharing online? How do you keep yourself, your mates, and your family safe in cyberspace? So that you're not giving the threat a free kick. So to speak, from a technical perspective, don't be reusing passwords for different devices or different accounts. Make sure your social media accounts are set to private, not public. Make sure that your personal electronic devices, your phone, your smartphones, have the privacy settings all locked down. If you're connecting to a public Wi-Fi or to a Wi-Fi full stop, is it safe? I mean, should you really be using public Wi-Fi? Thinking twice about what's posted online. Now there are some resources that people can use to help, and my team here in Information Warfare Division have published what we've called a field guide to online security. And it's published on the Defence Protected Network, and so anyone with DPN access can just jump on and search for the Field Guide to Online Security. It's on the Joint Cyber Directorate site, and that guides people through how to lock down your privacy settings for each of the social media applications, how to lock down your phone, whether you're using an iPhone or an Android device, what settings you should have in place to help protect yourself, how to use virtual private networks, and other techniques that I think that people will find of interest.
If proactive protection is the first part, the second is much harder. We all leave a digital footprint every time we go online. While we can limit that footprint through the measures General Thompson outlined, we will never completely eliminate it. So, what do we do if we think we are reading something that has been designed to manipulate our understanding or emotions? What do we do if we find ourselves in the online ambush cognitive engagement area? Well, we need to think critically rather than emotionally, so let's call our immediate action drill reactive reflection. Pausing to critically reflect will give us space to assess whether we are actually being targeted. Siobhan Heanue has been an ABC journalist for over 15 years, including as a foreign correspondent in New Delhi and reporting on the build-up to the liberation of Mosul from ISIS in Iraq. She says the first two things we should examine are the source of the information and what it's trying to achieve.
Well, when journalists publish information, the golden rule of thumb, which has never changed, is that you want to establish a reliable source and you want to corroborate either their information or more commonly now the imagery and the video perhaps that they provide. So the two things that you're really looking for, if you boil it down, are the origin of the information and the intent behind the information. And those two things, origin and intent, apply just as much to journalists as they should apply increasingly to consumers of news. When you're reading a blog or an article online, you want to think about the origin in terms of the platform that you read it on. Was it a reputable news site? Was it the BBC or the New York Times, or was it a blog you've never heard of? And you want to look at that byline, look at that author, and see if you can check who they are, if you've heard of them before, where they might come from. And it's important for both journalists and news consumers to search consistently for those authoritative, credible and independent sources. And I always urge people to read widely. I think if you consume from a variety of sources, that only helps your overall picture of things. But you must always have that sense of cynicism behind your eyes going, is this an independent or a credible source? And how can I dig a little bit deeper to kind of interrogate that? And then when it comes to that second branch of intent, whether it's someone who's giving you information and hoping that you might publish a story, or whether you've seen an image that's gone viral on social media and you're thinking of republishing it, you also have to think about intent, why the person is giving you that information, or why so-and-so in a suburban backyard has posted this emotive picture or informative picture about anything, whether it be a weather event or perhaps they've filmed what they purport to be a crime in progress or something. So there has to be an element of trying to work out what the motivation behind the sharing of that information is.
Once we have checked the source and its intent, it is useful to reflect whether the post is trying to inform us or whether it is trying to elicit an emotion. If it is provoking an emotional response, this may well be the result of precision micro-targeting. You are seeing it because someone wants you to, based on your online profile. It's easy to believe because it confirms your existing view. This is particularly pertinent for photos and video. However, there are some readily available tools that can help you decipher whether it is genuine or not.
Yeah, that's when the red flag should really go up. But unfortunately, it doesn't with a lot of consumers. And we know that confirmation bias is a real problem when it comes to news consumption. And the other issue is simply that people are consuming news and information within kind of information silos. That is that in the good old days, we had, newspaper editors or TV bulletin editors acting as gatekeepers. So the consumer is really becoming key in this fight to differentiate between misinformation and disinformation and verified journalism. And so the big questions are around, media literacy of the population, and how do we kind of prepare people to be open to the threats of misinformation and disinformation. But it does still rest with the individual to be able to look at those red flags popping up where they see perhaps a website or a blog or a domain that they can't identify with a known news outlet. Perhaps you can't work out what country it originates from. And those are the kind of moments where you have to step back and just do a simple Google search and see if the same information pops up anywhere else in a more reputable outlet. There are particular problems around images because they evoke emotion, and we know that images and video in particular go viral very fast. It's very easy to get sucked in by evocative imagery. And so some of the standard practices that journalists should engage in are things like reverse image searches. So using tools like Google reverse image search, or there's one called Tandex, which is excellent, is something that everyone can access. And so when, Aunt Mabel shares for the 13th time that shot of the sharks in the flooded shopping mall, that's an image that you can reverse search to find where it comes from. Or how old it is, because we see often in natural disasters and in war zones that images that have come from prior conflicts or incidents get reused over and over again. But it does take time, and hitting that pause button is sometimes the big challenge for both journalists and readers of the news.
This idea of pressing a pause button is an important part of reactive reflection. As Zac Rogers points out, information distancing is a useful tool we can use to break clean from the online ambush.
I know we're in the age of COVID-19, Greg, so what social distancing has entered our vocabularies. I was just reading the other day, someone was bringing up the concept of information distancing. And I think it's an interesting concept with regard to your question. Because cyberspace is a designed space, and as I said, it is inherently manipulative. The dominant internet model is one where attention is harvested for clicks. Those clicks are analysed, and that analysis leads to predictions and modification of human behaviour. That's now not in dispute. That is literally the dominant business model we have come to got used to in the age of the internet. But information distancing. So what about, can we be more aware of how we are manipulated online? If you're using a social media platform and you're finding that for some reason you're feeling a bit wound up, or you're feeling a bit jazzed up or a bit manipulated, that's something I think is not beyond people to be aware of. And then you might ask yourself, well, why am I'm just looking at a bunch of ones and zeros and a graphic user interface on a digital object in front of me, and all of a sudden I'm having these emotional and psychological reactions. That's a bit strange. And I think that's perhaps a point where people could implement some information distancing. They could just, put your phone down, go for a walk, go and talk to a human being, things like that. Just little interventions we can all make in these attention harvesting methodologies, which I think are not beyond individuals and families and communities to implement and think about.
The internet gave the world's population unprecedented access to information, and the modern mobile phone put that information directly into our pockets. Yet, the same environment which offers so much has become an intellectual battleground, one where anonymous adversaries seek to change your very perceptions of knowledge through cognitive warfare. The good news is we can limit the threat of this digital battle space. By practicing proactive protection and being conscious of our digital footprint, we can limit the amount of information available to an adversary to conduct precision micro-targeting. This will help us avoid the online ambush in the first place. However, if we do find ourselves reading something provocative, something that doesn't feel quite right, then we can go through our counter-online ambush drills of reactive reflection. Who wrote the piece, and are they accountable? What is the intent of the piece? Is the language or photo factual or emotive? Does it confirm what I already believe? Have I cross-checked it with a quick Google or reverse image search? Perhaps, most importantly, before I comment, repost or accept it as fact, do I need to step away and conduct some information distancing, giving myself time to gain some perspective? These simple steps will help us all survive online ambushes in an era of constant information and cognitive warfare.
Look, Greg, I'll just say as we wrap up that I welcome this discussion. You know, we need to be having open discussions about this topic and about our vulnerabilities in the information environment. Full stop. I think we all need to be working together, individually and collectively, to build resilience against threats in this space. I'm talking about threats against a unit, threats against the army, indeed threats against the nation, threats against ourselves, threats against our family, threats against our friends. This resilience is truly a team sport, and we all need to be on it. I think I just conclude by saying I think this is, we really need to be thinking of our individual responsibilities in that context, and I would just say that to paraphrase a famous quote, that individuals might not be interested in information warfare, but information warfare is certainly interested in you.
Cove Thoughts is produced by the team at The Cove, part of the Australian Army's Professional Military Education Network. For more information, visit www.cove.army.gov.au. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the contributors and do not necessarily reflect the position of the Australian Army, the Department of Defence, or the Australian Government.